All right, we're recording. How to get a middle or front split with Coach Adam and myself. Adam has a front split and a middle split, and then I don't, but I'm still gonna give my thoughts on how to do it. But I've been pretty close before, and my wife can do it, so it kind of puts me in that subject matter expert area. And I've seen plenty of people do it, so I know how to do it.
Yeah.
I just won't do it until it's time, and it's not time yet. But yeah, we're going to talk about splits today, and more importantly, why they're important, why it should be a pursuit for a lot of people. And actually, I messaged you and said, could we do this? But I already had it in my brain and on my list that I wanted to do it eventually because um, you had told me when we were discussing something, privately, I can't remember, but maybe it was before the last podcast. You were like, honestly, for your lower body training or mobility training, almost 99% of your issues will be taken care of if you just train for the middle split and the front split. And that made a lot of sense because we were talking about like the end goal, what it's going to take to get there. Like, your hip rotation, your specific, like specific areas, like your hamstring, they're going to have to be flexible. Your calf's going to have to be flexible. Your ankle likely won't have as many issues if, like if you can get into this position or if you try to daily or weekly. So then I was having some hip issues. I train really hard. So a lot of little stuff, ankle, knee stuff comes up a lot. And I was like, all right, well, instead of just really trying to focus on my internal and external rotation, which has always been a big focus of mine, and other little things, I still keep some other few little things I like in there. But I was like, I'm just going to hyper focus on middle split, front split. So basically 4 days a week, it was 2 days were middle split, and then I would focus a little bit on front split, and the other days were front split and a little bit of focus on middle split.
Mm-hmm.
My hip's feeling great. I don't have to focus on the hip rotation as much. I still do a little bit in the warm up because sometimes I'll just sit too much and I forget and I'm locked in. But just in about 4 weeks, it has changed a lot. So that was just a little personal story. It works not just if you want to get those things, but if you want to make your lower body mobility and stretching super easy. So,
yeah. Did you do any test retests for like internal external rotation or something? Hip extension?
Oh no, not like nothing measured, but by feel. Yeah, my internal rotation is much better, and that's way harder.
Yeah.
For me it is. And I'd say probably most people. So it was my left one was a lot stickier. Like, like I could probably get to 25 to 30 degrees on the right side, just sitting, no warm up. And then like in the frog position, I'll lift up. I'll do like a little internal rotation lift off.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I'll test it. And it's just like, I don't have to warm up as much. I can get into it, but it still is one of my tight areas. Mm-hmm. I run a good bit. I squat a good bit. I do a lot. And then I sometimes will sit and then I'll be like, I really don't want to stand. And I usually have a timer. So I'm going up and down on my standing desk, but sometimes I'm just really tired and I just want to sit and work. And then I'll just be like, dang, I've sat too long. So they've definitely improved, but mainly where it's improving more is how quickly I can warm up for the session with that. So like, I don't have to focus as much. I can just get like a lot of good blood flow in, do a few little movements of what I'm feeling that needs to be kind of opened up and kind of just to get my mind right. And I can jump into training a little more quickly, which is huge for me.
Do you feel like there's less stress around your mobility flexibility training because you oriented everything towards the front split and middle split, or you oriented your hip mobility training towards that?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if there's less stress because I'm always putting pressure on it. Because now I'm just like, if I'm putting all this focus on it, I don't get a front split in a year. Like I'm an idiot. Like, I'm a loser. So
yeah.
No, not necessarily. But yes, like I just think about it less because I know there's like 2 or 3 movements that I can just get into that are going to be really challenging. But if I can just accumulate 3 to 5 minutes per side or, in total in these movements, then I feel so much better. Mm-hmm. And then, so it does like take the stress off of thinking of it. It's more so just like, I know like I just did my running and I'm about to go do something. So I'll quickly get into the front split with some yoga blocks or parallettes.
Mhm.
And then, maybe I'll do some Cossack squats, move around a little bit, then I'll hit a middle split, and then I'm like done. So
Yeah.
the stress of like choosing it is better. But part of me still is like, I need to find that. What is that next thing that's going to really make this like going to skyrocket my progression here?
Yeah. If you were taking, like if we were using a different example, like the squat, and you were like, hey, for the next 4 weeks, I want my squat to improve, what would you do in that scenario? Let's say you're squatting twice per week, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty standard for a lot of people, or at least someone that's like competitive or strong, right? They'll squat twice a week. If you wanted to 4 weeks where you're like, hey, I really want to double down, I want to like really put some kilos on my squat, what would you do?
Yeah. Do I need to call my lawyer or my therapist or something real quick before I get into this? Yeah, getting really personal. In general, not knowing anything and not knowing anything about a person, and I'm just trying to keep it generalized, I would say I would do something more contrasting on each day, maybe a high and a low day, or like a high rep, low rep, or a lot of tempo, more speed. So I would probably try and do, because if there's only 2 days, I wouldn't want them to be super similar. If I was like in 4 weeks, it has to improve. At the beginning of it, I would be like, this is all going to be tempo. If I knew I had months, I was like, this is all going to be tempo, and we're going to slowly build and load. And I'm probably going to be in a phase of more accumulation, slower, a little easier, like relax, so we can make small, lasting progressions. That's initially what I think.
Yeah, so I'm saying like if you were squatting twice a week, but now you have the option for the next 4 weeks, you can squat as many times as you want. The approach I would take if I was like, hey, this person, I want to put as much weight in a short time, 4 weeks as possible. I'm gonna have them squat 4 times a week. Like just do more squatting or more total sets per week, right? More total sets.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm gonna do in order to get them to squat more. I think it's the same thing with mobility training. Like you want to get the front split or the middle split. Oh, great. You just got to do the front split and middle split more often.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss. They're looking for the secret exercise. Like you said, like, I think there's still something lingering out there that's going to get me
I'm still going to look
split or the middle split. You can still look for it. But, I think the route for most people is like, just spend more time in that position. And that's going to get you to your goal much faster than trying to isolate this one thing. And to the point you made earlier about the middle split and front split being such a good target for sort of all things hip mobility is that when you look at the hip, you could say, is my hip extension the limiter? Is my hip flexion? Are my hip flexors? Is it my glutes? Is it my hip external rotators? Is it my adductors? Right? There's so many little things that you could start to pick apart and isolate as to what is the potential limiter for me having my hips feel mobile, or me getting into a good bottom squat position, or me getting my middle splits. Like I can start to isolate all of these things. But to your point, if I just use this middle split, I'm going to get a ton of adductor length. I'm going to get a ton of hip internal rotation. I'm going to get a ton of hamstring length. And then I go do my front split, and that complements it really well because now I work a ton of hip flexion extension. I work some hip external rotation. I work more hamstring length. Those two movements basically achieve or explore everything that's available to the hip, which is why it's such a good option for people to choose when just hip mobility is the goal.
Yeah, because even if you're not doing like specific work, let's just say hip rotation again, if you're frequently hitting it, let's just say 4 days a week, even if it's at like 10% of what you were doing, there's a lot less room for drop off, or you're more consistent than you would be in a way of just doing it once or twice a week, or if you remember, or if it's finally acting up again. That's a big thing for me, is finding something where I can touch and check a lot of boxes, because time is limited, especially as you grow training volume, to where like I don't have to wait for something to nag in order to start to like remember, okay, I probably need to focus on my hip rotation right now, or my hamstrings are like super tight. Why haven't I been training them? Or now I have to start implementing hamstrings every week, something like that.
Yeah, I gave you we were talking about this a little bit before you came on the podcast, but when I was working as a PT, I would always select my exercises based on what I knew the client was going to do most often. a very like standard or typical like PT program. If you've ever gone to PT, they'll basically hand you the sheet, your homework sheet, and they'll say like, hey, do this every day, just like do it every day, like very simple. And as a strength and conditioning coach, like, that's not like a very effective route. Like that just doesn't seem very well thought out. But the one thing that is really nice about that is that they just get a ton of touches on that thing. They get a very high frequency of whatever it is that you're working on with your PT program. And so when I would select these exercises, like I'd look at my client, they have low back pain. I know that their hamstrings are super short, or, like they're missing a lot of length in their posterior chain. I want them to do some sort of hamstring stretching. I'm just going to give them the hamstring stretch that I know they are going to do every day. I know if I give them this like, hamstring Pales rail where it's like really intense, 2 to 3 minutes long in the position, they have to do a ton of these contractions. They're going to do it once per week at the most. They're going to do it like the day before they come to see me again. And that's not going to make any sort of change when they do it once out of the entire week. And then maybe they miss a week. So it's like they're barely getting any touches on their hamstring, versus if I give them a supine hamstring stretch, laying on the back, pulling with a towel or with a belt, and they just sit in that position for 3 minutes, they're going to do that every day because it's comfortable, it's easy, but that high frequency is going to be more advantageous than the high intensity once per week or once every other week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what approach would you give to someone who actually maybe is into fitness? Like, let's just say like they really do want the goal, like they want the front split, but they're pretty far off, or they want it, but they know like I'm not in a place to be like I can make up my own routine. Or would you still want some variation if they were like, hey, I'm going to give four days a week? Would you still add a little variation to it, or would you just keep it as simple as possible? If they were willing to do it, they were like, if you write it, I'll do it. What approach would you take there?
Yeah. So in that scenario, I'm going to approach it like any other skill. I remember when I was in PT school, I had a motor learning class, and everyone in the class had to learn how to juggle, and different groups in the class had a different program for how they would juggle. Some people would juggle like really challenging objects like a few times per week. Some people would juggle really easy objects like a tissue. If you've ever done like juggling with a tissue, right? It's like super easy just to get the pattern down, and they would do that every day. So there's these like different approaches you could take to learning any skill. And I think there's a time and place for all of it. And ultimately, just like someone learning a muscle up for the first time or learning a snatch for the first time, I want to start them with something that's super, super regressed, super easy for them to get into. And I want them to do it at a really high frequency. Once we've kind of surpassed that phase, then I want to start including some sort of intensity or some sort of like challenge to that movement, so that they continue to learn more and more about that movement. They're continued to be challenged, which ends up improving their mastery of that specific movement. So for the middle split and front split as an example, let's just take one of them just to like make it a little bit easier to talk about. Let's take the middle split. I might have them start in like a standing pancake position, which is essentially a middle split. It's just really high, right? So they're starting in a standing pancake. Hey, I'm going to have you do that 4 or 5 times per week to start. We do that for a few weeks. Now we just start to widen your feet a little bit. Okay, we do that for another few weeks. Now you're getting to the point where you can actually mimic the shape of a middle split, right? You're not all the way in the bottom, but you're kind of close to the middle split in terms of like your feet are pretty wide, like you're getting a really good stretch in your adductors. At that point, I can start to include some sort of like complexity or intensity. And so I'm going to say, hey, like I want you to hold the middle split stretch for 30 seconds. Then I want you to push your feet down and into the ground to contract the adductors. You're going to do that for like 10, 15 seconds. Then you're going to contract like glute med, try to like spread your feet out or slide your feet out even a little bit more. You're going to hold that for 10 to 15 seconds. And then you're going to relax. Do that for a few sets. And you might only do that 2 or 3 times per week, maybe even less, maybe once per week. But on the other days, you're just getting touches on that middle split by just spending a little bit of time in there. I'll tell the audience this. I told you this before the call, but the way that I got the middle split was just including it into my cool down for 5+ years. So when I was training as a weightlifter, every day you do some sort of lower body training. So I was also doing some sort of like lower body cool down or stretching for my hips after my training sessions. And I would include the middle split and front split in all of those. the way it started was very regressed. So I used a band when I first started. I think I saw this from like probably Kelly Surratt at the time, where like I have a band from the pull-up bar and I'm just putting like the band underneath my armpits. So it's basically offloading me, but I can still get into that middle split or front split position because some of the weight of my body is taken off. So it's like just like an easier way to get into it. So that's how I started. And then as I could get better and better into that shape, I just took the band away and I kept doing that. And each time that I would train the middle split or front split, I wouldn't do more than like 60 seconds in that position. You know, like, could you? Of course, like the more time you
Like
spend
in total or just before you took a break?
in pretty much in total, like I would do one set of middle split, one set of front split on both sides, both for 30 to 60 seconds. And that's it. But I did that for 5 years, probably 5 times per week. And that's how I got the middle split and front split. Super, super simple. There was no like use of PNF, pails, rails, different drills to get these positions, or like I'm going to isolate my hip internal rotation because I know that's a limiter for me. No, I just spent more time in the position and got better over time. I don't think that's the fastest way to get to the middle split and front split. So if I had a client coming to me and saying like, hey, my goal is to get the middle split, I'm going to give them some of this advanced stuff, but never at the expense of just like high frequency, a lot of time spent in that position. Because I know that's one, that's going to make improvements quickly, but two, that's what is the lowest barrier for them to actually do the stretch.
Okay. So, what do you think about people who have the middle and front splits, but they have huge mobility limitations as well? Like coming to mind, like I have a client, a female too, which is just, this is more rare, but like just absolute dog water, hip external or internal rotation, like sitting can barely get both feet, like 10 degrees, but middle split, front split, like no warm up can basically get into it.
Yeah, so I would just adjust the position of the middle split and front split to isolate her problem, right? Like if you look at her pelvis in both of those positions, you probably can simply change the pelvis position. Now all of a sudden she can't get the middle split, right? So like in the middle split, a lot of people will be in this like super extended anterior pelvic tilt position. If you tell her, hey, now I want you to do it with a posterior pelvic tilt, she probably can't do the middle split.
Yeah.
So you just make subtle changes to the position to make it more challenging based on where they're limited. And for any like big pattern, like a split or like a squat, the more you can change the position and still achieve it, the greater your mastery of that specific movement, right? It's like, okay, you can do a front split with an anterior pelvic tilt. Now can you do a front split with a posterior pelvic tilt? Okay, you can do a front split where your back leg is pointed kind of towards the outside or sort of like externally rotated. Now I want you to try to internally rotate it in that position. And you keep just making subtle tweaks like that to become better and better at that position as a whole, which again, it's the same approach as, any athlete to learn any skill, right? Like a lot of throwers, they'll throw different objects to become more and more of a master of throwing, right? Like they throw this way, then they throw this way, then they throw granny toss back this way. And they do all these different throwing variations to master everything that, succumbs the throwing motion. And it's the same with the front split and middle split, same with any mobility position or like when you're trying to achieve like, really any skill. But yeah, I think that as a coach, you just look at it and go, oh, okay, you can do that. Well, let's like start to challenge this more and more. And for the person that, I want to use the middle and front split as a like just general hip mobility, but I still realize they have this limitation. Well, that is the time now I can isolate that specific thing because that's what's limiting them from becoming more and more of a master of that movement. Right. So it's like in your scenario, I know you mentioned like your hip internal rotation on one of your hips is limited. I would first lay the foundation of doing the middle split as often as we possibly can. And if I then realize like, hey, this internal rotation on one of these hips is still the limiter. Okay, well, now we just do a little bit of internal rotation once or twice per week on top of that to make sure you continue to get better and better at the middle split.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that when you mentioned that, I was thinking the middle split she gets into is usually like a pancake. And I bet you if we had to raise her torso to be more upright, it would be extremely challenging. And
Exactly.
then maybe that's all it would take is just like raise up 10 degrees and hold. And like, even if you're propping yourself up and just slowly try and gain range of motion each time you do it, would probably, I know it would challenge the hips. So
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think to the idea that you mentioned earlier about the middle split and front split also just being this like good target for anyone that's trying to improve hip mobility, it starts to like shine light on the things that are very limited. And that's also why it's a really good tool, because if your PT says like, or your coach says, hey, like your hip internal rotation's bad and you need to work on your hip internal rotation, they give you a couple stretches to do that. And you keep doing that. You don't really know if you're getting better or not unless they're good about doing some sort of test retest and they're measuring like, hey, you now have 5-10 more degrees of hip internal rotation. But I know a lot of coaches that I've talked to, they're not doing that. It's like, hey, my day one assessment, I see that your hip internal rotation is bad. And now you just have hip internal rotation stretching for the rest of the time that we're working together. What's so great about the middle and front split is it acts as a test every single time that you do it. Like a very, very nice test retest that I could use and very easily see, am I getting more mobile or am I not? And to the point we made earlier, what's really nice about getting more mobile in those big positions is that there's likely a huge transfer to a lot of other things that require less mobility.
yeah, it reminds me of, I do the same kind of thing almost with everything when I'm warming up, which it's a little different for me because I'm training for sport. So my warm-ups they take a little bit more time and I'm just a little more nuanced because I'm trying to be as efficient as possible and get into it as perfect of a position as possible. So like as a shortcut or like a heuristic, like I'll do a little warm up. Let's just say I'm going to warm up for the front squat. I'll do an empty bar front squat and I'll use that as like an assessment, like what is today, like what is an issue. Because then during the rest of the warm-ups, like my left arm was tighter, I'll roll out the tricep, I'll hit some more front squats, I'll roll out the forearm, I'll hit some more. And then hopefully by my first like working set, not hopefully, by my first working set, it is good to go because that's what I use. It's just like I quickly check and I do that with any movement. Like most things are pretty rare, like on a deadlift or a squat or something, but like a push press or a snatch, like I'll hit a few and I'll be like, all right, I need to just, put a minor focus on this. And then that's all I need is just something small, but I use each thing as like a little assessment, similar to what you said with the split. And for me, like the split honestly has been so good. I haven't really had to do that other than just maybe incorporating something I probably already would have. Like my left glute is super tight too. And, that probably is affecting the rotation. So like, I'll usually be like, when I want a quick break from the middle split, I'll hit a pigeon stretch or something. Cause one, I really like it and I feel really good after doing 2 minutes. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And then I'll hit the middle split again. It feels so much better.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. I think a lot of people should be doing something like that to identify where their limitations are. You're going to get, for the front squat example, like you're obviously going to get better at the front squat by doing the front squat. But if you do this one little thing, just like in between your sets, or you do this one little thing to warm up, it makes the front squats even better. And it's the same when trying to achieve the middle and front split. Like I said, like I wouldn't, if I was trying to get someone better at front squatting and let's say their like lat was the limiter, I'm not going to have them only do lat stretches and not front squat. I'm still going to have them front squat. It's the same with the middle and front split, right? It's like they're still going to do the front split, middle split, but my glute is really tight when I get into this position, do a little pigeon, and then I go back to the split. Great. Now I'm getting even better at this. And that I also get an immediate test retest, which is so great, right? It's like I do a middle split. Okay, do a pigeon. Oh, my middle split is or front split probably, but my front split is much better right after I do this pigeon. If you do the pigeon and the front split's not better, okay, maybe that's not my problem. That's limiting me from getting my front split. Okay, I need to try something else. And again, like I don't want people to get lost in like most people trying to achieve the front and middle split. I think they get lost in like the special exercises and like, oh, I need to do the pigeon and I need to do this stretch for my hip internal rotation and this stretch for my hip flexor. It's like, no, just do the front split and middle split first. And when you get closer and closer to achieving the goal, then you start to include these little nuances to make it even better, right? Same with someone like, let's use the front squat as another example. They get better and better at the front squat just by doing the front squat. Now they're 5 years into front squatting. Now we can include a couple like nuanced drills to get that last like 5 to 10% even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Cause like when they're, kind of like anything, when you're novice at it, it's like really just, doing that one thing is going to improve so much and you're going to get gains out of that. So it's one, you don't need a lot of variation, and two, more variation probably won't help anyway. So, as you improve, then maybe that's where the variation might help a little bit and be more useful of your time.
Yeah, I mean, so like it feels cliche at this point to say the said principle, but the said
Yeah.
principle always applies, right? Like
Yeah.
if you want to get better at the front squat, front squat. If you want to get better at the middle split, do the middle split. But I think people just see a lot of like sexy things on Instagram of like doing the middle split with this band variation or with this like contraction or with this like slight variation. And it's like, yeah, those are great drills for that 5 to 10% last bit to finally get the
Yeah.
movement. And you're probably at that point, right? Like you're at the point where it actually
Pretty close.
does make sense to start to use some of these drills to isolate the problems that are limiting you from getting it and to like get that last little bit. But for most people just starting the journey with the front and middle split, just do the thing. Just do the middle split and front split. I will say a lot of people like that struggle to get into that position, finding the right regression is really important, and that's where it's nice to have some sort of guidance from a coach or someone who like knows the full progression and regression of a middle split and front split. But for the middle split, just like a simple one is just propping your hands up on something in between your legs, right? It's like I'll use a med ball or like a parallel or even a bench, just like put my hands on a bench and my legs will be spread out into that middle split position. Super, super easy way to get into that position. For the front split, I gave the example of like the band under the armpits earlier, just to take off some of the weight of the body. But another one that I use often is just getting into the couch stretch position and then just start to walk my leg forward. And I have some sort of hand support so that I'm kind of taking weight off with my hands. But can you kind of picture that? Like couch stretch, walk that leg forward until it basically starts straightening the knee. Now you start to mimic that front split position. But even that drill, like when you think of those drills, that's still just a front split or middle split. It's just a regression. Like doing a front squat, it's like a front squat to a box, right? It's like, oh, you can't quite achieve the bottom position yet without some sort of compensation. Okay, well, we're just going to have you squat to a box. And you do that for a month, and then we're going to lower the box, do that for another month, lower the box again. Now all of a sudden you're squatting full depth with a beautiful front squat, just because we started at a regression that's appropriate for you and just slowly worked our way into the full position.
Do you, okay. Yeah, the middle split is much tougher for me. I don't know if that's just,
it's
that's
for
more
everyone.
common.
For everyone.
Okay. And yeah, like so the regressions are different. I'm more of like I put my elbows on the bench and just try and relax, or I'll use a parallel. But sometimes the bench just feels better because I can actually relax the upper body and just focus on breathing and getting deep. And then I will use the band on like a pancake, like a seated pancake, because I'll put the band around my feet and then wrap it on my back, just so I know I'm getting pressure, and I it's basically just offloading like the effort. Like I don't have to think about doing it as much. But when I do that, like my glute medials, like they will cramp. They will start, and that's probably the biggest issue I have. And that's why I do a lot of the, like I'll roll it out a little bit, do some pigeon. But that's honestly the biggest hump, other than gaining range of motion.
Yeah, this is a great, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is a great concept I think people should understand as well. Like I'll get that complaint a lot, like cramping is limiting the position. Okay, that's a sign that you're not used to being in that position. That is essentially your nervous system saying, hey, you're not okay in this short position. I'm going to create a cramp so you get out of this position. And in that scenario, you just need to regress it and then spend more time just outside of that position, or just short or regressed of that position, and then gradually work your way back into that. But with all flexibility training, I think people don't really understand this when they think of like, let's take the front split as the example. When they're doing the front split, they think my hamstring needs to get longer, or my hip flexor needs to get longer. Well, it's not what's happening. Over time, there is some research to show that like, yeah, your hamstring will actually like improve its length when you look at it under a microscope. But more of what's happening when you're making improvement in flexibility is that there's an inhibition of the nervous system. So essentially, your brain is telling you that, oh, actually your hamstrings are now safe to be in this position. I'm not going to create a cramp, or like, I'm not going to like create a sensation of tightness. That's what's happening. You're just creating an inhibition of the nerve system. And I think when people start to think of it from that lens, it starts to make more sense as to how to improve. It's like, okay, if I want my brain to create less inhibition around this lengthened position, well, I just need to go close to that position, and I need to control my breathing. I need to make my nervous system feel safe in this position. Therefore, spending a lot of time in that or around that position is a great way to start to trick your brain to say like, oh, actually, like, this isn't so bad. Like, I'm not going to get injured or hurt in this position. I'm safe in this position. And that's when your brain starts to let the guard down and allow you to get into that range without the sensation of tightness or without some sort of cramp like you're experiencing.
Okay, so essentially I can do a front split. You're just telling me my brain is saying I'm too weak to do it.
Totally. Actually, this is true. And the example I use for people is, have you ever heard of what do they call a manipulation under anesthesia?
I was just about to ask you, if people are asleep, can we just,
Yes.
basically just
The answer is yes. Like, in most scenarios, right? There is like a scenario where your like joint essentially like hardens and starts to ossify, like creating bone around it. And, but those are like very, very extreme cases. But for most people, like, they go, I used to see this after like total knee replacement. People would just be like, get so stiff. And that's the scenario when they would use the manipulation under anesthesia. So they put them under anesthesia and they basically just like crank on their knee.
Like basically putting it into extreme flexion until it crunches and gains 100% range of motion back. I've seen the videos.
Exactly. Like, that's what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, of course, like, you're decreasing the inhibition by just like going under anesthesia, making the person unconscious. But that same theory applies to everyone. It's like, you can probably achieve this position. Your brain and your nervous system is the thing that's limiting you from achieving that position. And the only way to do it without anesthesia is just slowly showing your brain that, hey, I can do this position safely. And in order to do that, you just like take off the load by putting your hands on parallettes or using a band underneath your armpits. And then you slowly start to like go farther and farther. And again, from like, this is also where high frequency comes into play so importantly. It's like, if your nervous system is getting this like stimulus consistently every single day, wouldn't you think that it's going to start like putting its guard down, knowing like, oh, okay, like, I did this yesterday, like, I know it's safe. Oh, I did this for the last 10 days in a row, like, okay, I know it's safe.
Yeah. Or if we could just there are some, you just take a drug that, makes you a little looser, and then you just, maybe you get a little high, and then you can just start hitting your splits, and it'll be a lot easier.
Totally. And I'm sure you've talked to people that, they'll smoke weed or do something like that. And it's like, wow, stretching feels so good. I get into such deeper positions. And that's part of what's happening, right? It's like, they're just in a much calmer state. Their nervous system is like, much more parasympathetic, for lack of a better term. It's just like down regulated. And so they can get into these deeper positions.
Yeah.
Okay, I will say too, like, just one more comment on that, and it comes back to the point we made earlier about like, yes, frequency is really important, but where like high intensity comes in, it's the same. It's acting on the same decreasing of inhibition of the nervous system, and that is like, take the middle split, the example I gave earlier, where you go into the middle split position and you squeeze your feet down and towards the inside to contract your adductors. If your brain can see that, or feel, or sense that you can contract a muscle in this position, it's more likely to know that this position is safe. Like, hey, I have control in this position. I can contract and utilize my muscles in this position. Therefore, I'm going to feel more safe in that position. And to like those of you who are really good at the front split or middle split, this is exactly how you become better and better at it, right? It's like, okay, you can now get into the front split, but it's still like a little scary, or you still feel some sensations of tightness. We'll start to explore some contractions of the muscles that are involved. Like in a front split, I might push my front heel down into the ground to contract my hamstring. I might push my back leg or knee down into the ground to contract my hip flexor. I hold that for a few seconds. I'm now sending this message to my brain saying like, I can contract my muscles in this position. I have control over this position. I'm safe in this position. And that's exactly how you continue to get better and better at the front split or middle split, because you're just decreasing this inhibition from the brain.
Okay. Yeah. What I was going to say is I do that with the frog stretch before I do the middle split. So I'll do frog, active frog, move around a little bit. Then I'll basically do like a PNF, like I'll push really hard into the ground with my knees, and I'll get pretty deep. Like we're talking like, if I was in a front split position and I was this close to the ground, people would be like, you got the front split almost. But as soon as I, extend and I have my knees, locked out, and I'm now trying to with a parallel and get into a front split, then still the glute, like no glute issue when I'm really close to the ground. When I have the frog, as soon as I straighten the legs, glutes firing.
Yeah, but even in that concept, you use the frog stretch as a way to start to decrease the inhibition from here to even start to get into the middle split, right? People do that very naturally of like, I do this like slightly easier regress stretch to then be able to get into the more advanced stretch. Well, that is a form of decreasing the inhibition. It's just you're using a slightly different drill. And that's a great way to do it, right? I'm going to like try to just comfortably get near this position, and then I start to push it more and more. That's like a very it's very like friendly to the nervous system, again, for lack of a better term. Instead of like just jumping into the deep end, I'm going to like walk slowly from the shallow end by going into the frog stretch first and then going into the middle split.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Then I want to wrap up with maybe, besides actually doing, because we'll say these are number one, doing the middle split or trying to, let's just say you're holding onto a parallel or a bench and you're just letting your legs go out, and you're trying to get into a position similar to it. And then a front split, same thing on each side. Let's just say like you're holding on to parallels on your sides and you're just trying to, keep your legs straight and get as wide as you can. Other than those two, what is one or maybe two movements or regressions that you're thinking of that maybe someone else like wouldn't be as easy for them to conjure up? What would you say? Try these to regress, and that will be like, that's good enough for now, and just do these for the next 2 months.
Yeah. So for the front split, just mimicking the couch stretch position or half kneeling hip flexor position, right? It's actually very similar to the front split. It's a very simple way to regress it, and almost everyone can get into those positions. And then just take that couch stretch or half kneeling hip flexor stretch and start to straighten out the front leg. It's a very, very easy way to start to get into the front split. For the middle split, you can use a lot of the like pancake stretches to start to get into the middle split. They're slightly different, but there's a high transfer from one to the other. And the pancake is generally easier for people to get into than the front split. And the examples you gave of like you put a band around your feet and then wrap it around your back. I like to put a barbell on the ground and I just put my feet like on the sleeves of the barbell and I just like pull myself from the center of the barbell. Even, pancake, there's a lot of nice regressions for the pancake, but most simply just elevating your butt and using some sort of object that pushes your torso weight forward. So like holding onto a band in front of you or a cable in front of you, or even just holding on to like a weight plate and leaning forward. I'll also put like a weight plate on my upper back to kind of push me deeper into that position. So those are like very simple regressions for both. So couch stretch or half kneeling hip flexor for the front split, and then the pancake or variations of the pancake for the middle split. The progressions that I would say, if let's say you're getting closer and closer to the front split and middle split, is like I mentioned a few times already, is just start to use a few contractions in that position to gain more and more control or to decrease the inhibition in those positions. So, you want to primarily target the muscles that are being stretched the most. So in the middle split, doing a contraction of the adductors, in the front split, doing a contraction of the hamstrings on the front leg and the contractions of the hip flexor on the back leg. Like those are the areas that have the most extreme stretch and that are usually limiting for people. So start to do like short contractions. And I know there's like, that you could probably go online and look up like PNF stretching for like exact protocols, but I wouldn't get lost in that. Just like 5 to 10 seconds, start super short. and then gradually build that up over time. If you can go from 5 seconds, you do a few sets and then you build that up to like doing a 30-second contraction, you're going to get better and better and gain more control in that position.
Okay. All right. 1 year from now, we're going to record a podcast where we have to hold a split position for the entire thing. It might be a short one. It'll be at least 15 minutes, though. It'll be something impressive.
I'll say the front split and middle split, it's like, for somebody that's like a big deadlifter or squatter, if you squat, let's say you squat 500, you may only do it at one point. You're still a 500-pound squatter. I kind of apply that same logic to the middle split and front split. And there's going to be times in which you can't do the middle split and you can't do the front split, and times when you can. So there's times in even in my training year where I'm not focusing on my mobility a ton. I'm doing like just really focusing on heavy squatting and heavy deadlifting, and I'll actually lose the ability to do that front and middle split position. And then I'll spend another training wave where I just go and regain that. And within, 4 weeks, I'm back to doing a front split and middle split. So you don't have to be able to do it all the time to say that you did a middle split.
We'll see. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, it's almost more impressive. It's like doing a middle split after not doing it before you're 18 years old as a male, and doing it after you're 20. It's kind of like doing a 500 back squat before you're 20. Like,
totally. I totally agree. I think for a lot of people let's say in your space, like competitive CrossFitters, would you still classify yourself in that space? Yeah. Okay. So, I would say a 500-pound squat may be more common than a full middle split, like a good.
Oh, definitely.
Split. Yeah.
Mainly because like that's what they, and just in a way justifiably so, that is more attached to performance, like, and that's what they see it for. But sure, if they really were to look, just depending on the person, but like to look at their limiters, like, like how quickly can you squat? Is there a limitation in your squat that's not letting you do 100 reps and feel good after, which maybe if you start doing the splits now, it's less load on you to do that much. And then when it gets into like skills of like handstands or press to handstand or, L something, whatever it is, like that's where you see people struggle a lot. And it's like, well, you're literally on level 0 for middle split, front split, just get to level 3 and you'll probably be able to handle those things so much better, and get to level 5 and you probably never have to think about it again.
Totally. I think too, a lot of people will, to this point, like a lot of people will want a front split and middle split because it looks really cool, but it doesn't impact your performance at all. Like you said, if you're at level 3 or you're like, you've kind of made some progress in both those positions, you probably have everything you need to compete in whatever sport you're competing in, unless you're competing in gymnastics, of course, or something where it does require that. But, most people, like, I wouldn't say to go chase the front split and middle split. If you're already a great mover, you're performing in some other sport that doesn't, like, this is, it's really cool, but it's definitely not necessary. If you're someone who just wants to be generally mobile and fit, it's a great target to aim for. And it gives you some sort of like roadmap of, hey, this is where I'm going. And for those people, it's very useful. But if your goal is to squat big or deadlift big, like, you may not have to chase the front split or middle split. So I always like give that, or I want to give that caveat, because there's a million things you could do in training. And if I just add in another 2 things, the middle split and front split, well, it's like, fuck, now I got to learn how to do this like muscle up, and I got to learn how to snatch over 300 pounds, and I got to learn my middle split and front split. It just becomes overwhelming for so many people.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to push back a little bit. You got to get it. I mean, it's just like it's the new normal. Like the farther you are away from it, the less cool you are.
Hey, I agree. That's why I got it. But
yeah. Yes. So, all right, good. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end.
Cool.
We will, if you have any questions or you need some demonstrations on these things, just send one of us a message or a comment, and we'll try and just send you some links to some videos. It's pretty easy to find. And like Adam said, keep it simple. And next time we're talking about this, maybe we'll have to give some demonstrations.
Yeah. I can send some, my front middle splits are pretty good right now, so I could send some videos.
Good. All right, everybody. Thank you for the time. Thank you for listening. We hopefully answered some questions for you and gave you a good idea of why you should be focusing on getting your splits and how to get them. So have an awesome day, everybody. Thanks again.